When asked what people's biggest fear is, it's not dying. It's the fear of public speaking. It's true. People fear public speaking more than death itself. But that's okay, because my guest today, Brenden Kamarasamy of MasterTalk, is going to give you actionable advice on how to speak better in public, how to communicate better, how to listen better. I think that you're going to find in this particular podcast, it's one where you're going to want to take notes, because he gives frameworks. He gives actual actionable advice, not just some, throwaway comments. He's going to give you frameworks on how to get better in a very systematic way. Wonderful guy, great conversationalist, but again, high value add here because he tells you exactly what you need to do to get better and offers you some free resources as well. Enjoy. Brenden is the founder of MasterTalk, a coaching program for ambitious executives and entrepreneurs striving to become the top 1% communicators in their industry. He also has a popular YouTube channel called MasterTalk that has nearly 37,000 subscribers, with the goal of providing free access to communication tools for everyone who is looking to level up their game. And if you've listened to this podcast, communication and how you say things is so important. So without further ado, Brenden, welcome to the ThriveMore podcast.
Roger, the pleasure is mine. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Communication is something that I have talked so much about on this show, but also as a guest on other shows, and with the team that I have here in the home office that I lead. And I've led very large teams prior, as large as 500, and it never ceases to amaze me the different levels of communication people have. There's a bell curve, as you know, there's a bell curve to everything, and certainly communication skills. There's a giant bell curve in our world, but especially in business. Can you start from the beginning of where did the inception of MasterTalk come from, and how did you get into this and then really become such a true expert?
For sure, Roger. In many ways, MasterTalk was an accident. I went to school for accounting, which is literally the opposite of what you would expect a communication expert to study. And in my journey in accounting, I did these things called case competitions. Think of it like professional sports, Roger, but for nerds. So other guys my age were playing like rugby or football or baseball or some other sport you probably wouldn't see me playing. I did presentations competitively, and that's how I learned how to speak. And then as I got older, I started coaching other students on how to communicate, not because I was talented at it, but because nobody else was able to coach them to win competitions. So I made a ton of mistakes, and I accidentally developed a talent and teaching other people how to communicate. So that in 2019, I had the idea of making free YouTube videos in my mom's basement, and I started posting videos, and then 5 years later turned into something I never could have imagined.
Wow. But what you've done is what every entrepreneur that's been successful is that you found, even if it was accidentally, you found a niche that there's a need for, and you've solved a problem for people. And speaking, communication, especially public speaking, is a big challenge for a lot of people. It's a problem that needs solving. So I love that, accidental or not. I love it. In my research, I found that you overcame your own challenges with public speaking. It sounds like these competitions maybe really helped with that, but talk about your journey from struggling with it to really mastering it.
Oh, absolutely, Roger. Yeah, that's why I'm such a big believer in the stuff that I do and in the work that I do, because I was a horrible communicator. I'll tell you a couple of things. So one, obviously, studying accounting, you wouldn't expect an accountant to be a great speech coach. The second one is I was born with a physical disability. So my left arm is crooked. So whenever I give presentations, people always look at my arm. They don't look at my face. And then the third piece is I grew up and still live in a city called Montreal in Canada. And for those who don't know, Montreal is a city where you need to know how to speak French, which is a language I didn't know. I'm trilingual today, but at the time when I was going through French school, I was presenting in a language I didn't even know. So I grew up hating communication. It was only in later years of my career that I really started to focus on it and honestly find some enjoyment out of it, which is really the point from this conversation. If I could do this, I'm sure everyone listening could be much better at speaking, for sure.
Yeah. What do you recall a tipping point where you realized, hey, I can actually do this? Like, instead of being worried or being self-conscious, I'm actually getting into a flow state here and enjoy being up here on stage and speaking. Was there a specific talk or like a tipping point in your life where you realized I'm not bad at this?
Yeah, for sure, Roger. It was actually in the first year of college when I started doing these competitions, these case competitions, or these nerd fests, so to speak. After the first one, I bombed. The second one, I bombed too. But then the third competition that I had done, I did really, really well. And it was at that moment that I realized, even if I had an oversized prom suit and my outfit wasn't as sharp as it should have been, I realized in that moment that I was actually really talented at public speaking. And the reason I'd never really known that is because if you spend your whole life speaking in a second language, you think that that's the ceiling of your communication skills. But then when you start presenting in your first language, you go, oh, actually, I'm a lot better at speaking than I thought I was. I don't have to find my words anymore. And
Yeah,
I was able
yeah.
to build on that foundation.
Wow. Cool. Cool. All right. So your clients are from various backgrounds. So you've got different experience levels, but again, if my research is correct, you focus your work primarily on women and immigrants. Speak to that, please.
Yeah, for sure, Roger. And this is something I found, since we're talking to entrepreneurs, what I found
Yeah.
fascinating about building a business is MasterTalk never really started as a business, right? It was mostly just a hobby. I was just making videos for fun. And then over time, it expanded, where a few months after I started posting videos, a lot of people started reaching out to me for private coaching. And I said, oh, people pay for this? Because I didn't really have a coach. And they said, yeah, of course we pay for it, because why would I spend hours watching videos when I could just hire you directly? And that's when I realized something really interesting in business, especially for those of us who are content creators, is there's a type of person who's going to watch all of your content and just sift through all the videos. And there's the person who pays for your service, which is completely different than the person who watches your content oftentimes. And what ended up happening with me is there ends up being 2 to 3 different customer segments that would much, much rather work with me directly than watch my videos. And everybody else, which is really the mission of MasterTalk, Roger, is how do I share all my knowledge for free with the world so that everyone can learn for free? Because I initially made MasterTalk for college students. But my clients, I would say there's 2 buckets they fell into. One is women executives who are generally at the vice president level or above in the corporate world. And their challenge is usually they're surrounded by a ton of men. They're the only women in the boardroom, and they feel really intimidated because they worked really hard to get there, and now they're always being compared to their male counterparts. So for them, communication is a top priority if they want to stand out at that level of competition. And then the second type of clientele is usually the ambitious immigrant executive. So they'll live in a country like India or Korea or China, and they'll immigrate to the US on an H-1B visa and climb up the corporate ladder, but they will get promoted largely on their technical abilities. So they're like really, really good engineers. They're STEM executives. And then they get to a director level or a high level in a company and they go, oh my God, my communication skills suck. I need to refine this. And that's the second type of person we work with.
Actually, that is great though, because especially, I mean, even a technical leader that's not from another country, I used to work in the pharmaceutical business for 25 years, and I found that technical leaders were so good technically, and then they would get promoted into a position of leadership. And as you know, in leadership, your job is to get results through others, which is very different than being an individual contributor. And I mean, I think that's a niche in itself, is just these technical experts that become leaders, which is a completely different skill set, and it's all around communication, yet they're not really trained in any of that in their formal schooling.
Not at all. I mean,
Yeah.
but what you just said, Roger, is 100% accurate. You really hit the nail on the head there, which is the idea that when you transition from IC, individual contributor, to leader, what happens with a lot of those engineers is because they learned everything from engineering school, they mostly learned how to solve the technical problem, not really how to solve the people problem, which is how do you get the person motivated, inspired to do the work that you used to do. And that is, I would say, the Achilles heel. I've just found with immigrants, they tend to work with me more because I look like an immigrant. That's one. And number two, the pain is more accentuated. So if somebody is a white male engineer, they'll feel the pain, but it's not too accentuated because they still understand American culture and they're still in the in the ethos of the country because they're born and raised in it, their family are Americans, etc. But with immigrants, it's a double whammy because they don't know the cultural context and they have trouble pronouncing, articulating words. So the pain is a lot higher. So they'll invest in a coach to help them with that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. For the entrepreneurs listening, the greater the pain, the higher the price point you can charge, and the bigger you can build your business. But honestly, the more you can help people too. The bigger the pain point, the more that you can actually help them. So what would you say? And I'm Brenden, I'm sure there's 100 things, but if you were to narrow down the top one or two things that you found that your clients need, I guess maybe I'm asking the question, like, what is square one? Like, where do you start at when you're starting with a new client? And I'm specifically talking about public speaking, because I think that as well as I know that what is one of the statistics? People fear public speaking more than death itself, which is just crazy, just absolutely crazy. They'd rather die than public speak. So what is square one when you have a new client coming in? What does that look like?
Yeah, for sure, Roger. And honestly, whether it's a client or just somebody listening,
Yeah.
the advice is surprisingly the same. When I looked at the industry, what I felt was missing, and that's what I felt I added to this body of work, Roger, is the idea of sequence and this idea of practicality. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you go on the street and you take a mic like on those TikToks and you ask people on the street, hey, what should I do to get healthier? Right? You just ask that simple question. Even if it's somebody who's unhealthy, who makes all the mistakes in the book, they'll still tell you, oh, you should eat the right things. You should eat less on average, and you should work out more often. Very simple. But if you ask the same question about communication, hey, how do you communicate more effectively to a GP, to a general public? Most of people won't know the answer. They'll go, I don't know, speak more, talk more, I guess conversate more. And that is actually the core problem that I've solved, because at least I think I've solved, is communication is like juggling 18 balls at the same time. One of them's body language, one of them's storytelling, one of them's eye contact, one of them's smiling. And the real question that I've asked myself is, what are the 3 easiest balls to juggle? What is that advice that we can apply to fitness but to communication? And I call it RQV.
Okay.
And I'll start with R and I'll throw it back to you, Roger.
Yeah.
So R is the random word exercise. Pick any words you want. Phone, igloo, eye contact, home, and create a random 60-second presentation out of thin air. And this serves 2 purposes. Number 1, for those of you taking notes, if you can make sense out of nonsense, you can make sense out of anything. You can talk about a phone. You could talk about your subject matter expertise all day long. Yeah. And the second use case is small talk.
Okay. So speak to that, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So small talk just means, what is it at the end of the day, Roger? It's 2 people who don't know each other, who are having an unprepared conversation. Mm-hmm. So if you can master the uncertain, like you can talk about phones, you talk about avocado toast, when you go back to, hey, how's it going? How's your day going? Well, it's the same questions that are being repeated over and over again. So you just get a lot better at answering them. And that's really step number 1. Is, especially for entrepreneurs listening or aspiring entrepreneurs, you're going to have to talk about your product and service 24/7, all the time, to everybody. So if you can practice talking about walnuts and avocados and trophy cases when you go back to whatever the service is, whether it's a coaching program, whether it's a waffle business you're starting, it's going to be really easy for you to talk about those because you know that stuff inside and out.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so you said, I want to make sure I got the consonants correct. RSQ. What was the?
All good. RQV.
RQV. So what is the Q then?
Absolutely. I wish I had a better analogy for you, Roger. I just couldn't find anything to. My other frameworks on storytelling, it spells out a word, but this I just couldn't do it.
RQV. Yeah.
Yeah. So Q is question drills.
Okay.
So a few years ago, Roger, when I started guesting on podcasts, I sucked. I remember some guy asked me, hey, Brenden, where does the fear of communication come from? And I started panicking on the podcast. I was like, dude, I don't know, man. Tokyo? You tell me. Like Dubai? Like New York City? And in the same way, I kind of messed up that question, Roger, all those years ago. A lot of us get asked questions we're not prepared for in our life about our businesses, about our products and services, about our life, in job interviews. And what I did to fix this is I said, okay, how do I get better at answering questions? Every single day, Roger, I answered one question that I thought the world would ask me about my expertise. So day one was, hey, Brenden, what tips do you have for introverts on speaking? Day two is, what's your vision for MasterTalk? Day three is, how do I work on my facial expressions? How do I get rid of my ums and ahs? But if you answer one of these questions, Roger, every single day for a year, you'll have answered 365 questions about your industry, and you'll be bulletproof. So now the last part to this is, what is the immediate use case for your audience, which is entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. So let's speak to both of them. The current entrepreneur is really simple. All you got to do is go back to the recordings of all of your sales calls that you had in the last 7 to 10 days. So if you're running a service-based business, it's probably recorded somewhere over Zoom. Re-listen to it, write down every sales question you got asked, and re-answer it better. If you're a product-based entrepreneur, remember the conversations you had at the retail store when you were selling your $10, I don't know, gizmo to somebody, and just write down all the questions. Does this thing have a warranty? Why is this different for every other product? If you're an aspiring entrepreneur, my advice is, why wait until you're an entrepreneur? Do it tomorrow. Nothing stops. You know, like I always use the restaurant example, Roger, since you talked about inspiring people. Like, people want to start a restaurant. It bothers me so much. They go, you know, Brenden, I can't start a restaurant because I need $50,000. I was like, what are you talking about? Just make the bloody waffles in your house and then just give them as samples for free to your friends. And if they like the samples, just offer them for waffles for $10 a month. And those conversations will help you answer those questions.
I love it. I love it. This segment is sponsored by Rockbox Fitness Franchising. Take control of your destiny and join the boutique fitness revolution with Rockbox Fitness. If you're ready to make a real impact in your community and own your own business that empowers people to achieve their best life, then Rockbox is the opportunity you've been looking for. They provide comprehensive support from site selection, upfit, training, and turnkey marketing, so you can open your studio with confidence and a strong recurring revenue member base. Visit rockboxfitness.com and click on franchise opportunities to learn more about this exciting venture in the fast-growing boutique fitness industry. It's time to turn your passion for fitness and for business into a thriving venture. V. What is V?
Absolutely. V is the video message. So there's two ways you can play this game. The first way is you take out your phone and you send a 20-second video message to somebody that you really love in your life, somebody that you really appreciate. It could be a friend of yours, a friend from college, a significant other. Women love this, by the way. Side note, you send this to your wife, you send this to your daughter, girlfriend, they'll fall in love with you. And you just, the video message is simply, you just say you're thinking about them and you say one thing you appreciate about them. That's it. And there's only one rule. It is my hard rule on this exercise, Roger, which is you are not allowed retaking the video. Simple as that.
I missed that. You're not allowed to do what?
You're not allowed to retake the video.
Well, so one take and done, one and done.
Yeah, one and done. That's correct.
Okay.
And the second use case, which is more of a Brenden signature move that I coined, called the BVM. So the BVM stands for the birthday video message. So this is what I do, Roger, during the year. My Google Calendar tells me whose birthday it is today. Close business partner of mine, a very big account client of mine. It could be a best friend from college. And on their birthday, I'll send them a video message with this stupid $15 birthday hat that I bought on Amazon. It's the best $15 I ever spent in my life. And I just go, guess whose birthday it is? It's yours. And people love it. And as a side note, as an entrepreneur, since we're speaking to that crowd, I've made a lot of money from that strategy without even wanting to.
Yeah. So I'm going to take you back then to, you said you used to get asked that question, you would struggle. So let me ask you that question. Why do you think people struggle so much with public speaking?
Yeah, absolutely, Roger. Where does it come from and why do people struggle with it? Here's my theory on it. And the approach that I like to take in the industry, a lot of my colleagues in this space are very academic, right? So they'll cite research papers, they'll cite white papers of why human beings struggle with that. That's not the approach I take. I take more of a common sense approach, which is, let's think about it. Where do we learn how to communicate in a formal way for the first time in our lives? And the answer for most of us in the world is school, right? Elementary school, high school, and this applies whether you live in the United States, whether you live in India, China, the UK, Canada. It's pretty much the same thing. But here's the thing, Roger. All of those presentations have 3 fundamental problems attached to them. The first one is that all of those presentations are mandatory. We don't wake up a morning and go, hey, Roger, you want to get breakfast and present all day? Nobody says that or does that. So that's problem statement number 1. Problem number 2 is you never get to pick the subject matter expertise that you want to present. So it's never something you care about. It's not, hey, Roger, what are you passionate about? Are you passionate about helping people thrive more, media, podcasting, communication? I know you talk about that on other podcasts. No, that's not what happens in the schooling system. You got to talk about the Renaissance, which is a time period in history, and Shakespearean poetry, and philosophy, and Nietzsche, and all this random stuff that most people don't like. Yeah. And number 3, the worst of all, every presentation, 100% of them, not 90%, 100% of all of them are tied to a bloody punishment. So if you don't do a great job, not only do you not get a pat on the back, you get a slap in the face, and you get told that your chances of going to college have now diminished because you screwed up this presentation. And we are conditioned from the ages of 9 to 10 until adulthood that every presentation is tied to a punishment. It's mandatory, and you don't get to present something you like. And that conditioning happens over and over again. So we grow up believing that communication is a chore, so it becomes one natural.
I don't know if I've ever heard it explained that. Wow. That is literally one of the best explanations to understand why there's such a fear there, because there really is. There really is. As an expert communicator, I had a gentleman named Chris Voss on this podcast.
Of course.
FBI negotiator. And he really talked about active listening, right? And I don't think we can talk, you and I can have a conversation about communication without talking about active listening. And I would love to get your take on that, because I think so many times too, and you've seen it, I've seen it, people that will public speak, they go up there with an agenda, they've got their notes or their teleprompter, and they're going to deliver their message with no thoughts of the audience and of using pauses and tonality and silence to really, make it more of a one-on-one, even if there's 1,000 people in the audience. How do you, specifically with your clients and in your messaging, address active listening?
Yeah, absolutely, Roger. I love Chris Voss's work. He's great. Mm. The way that I think about listening is the following. So once again, I always like to bring a weird angle to every problem in communication. And here's the problem statement I bring here, which is, when it comes to listening, we all know it's important. But when it comes to somebody like me who is terrible at it, and I'm still not that great at it, which is why I'm a great podcast guest, but I'm a horrible podcast host. Versus you're a very good podcast host because you're great at the listening piece. So I needed something more practical to work on. How do I actually measure success in listening? And this is something I've taught myself that's worked very well on me that I then taught to other people, which is the goals call. So the goals call is really simple, Roger. Here's what you do, and I'll walk you through what that looks like. Pick a friend in your life. Somebody who's open-minded, somebody who's really cool to talk to, not somebody that annoys you. Like, it needs to be somebody that you really love spending time with. But I would avoid family. It could be like a friend from college or something. You sit them down, and it's a 45-minute conversation. This is how the 45-minute conversation is broken down. The first part of the conversation is you just ask them, hey, Roger, I would love for you to take 5 minutes and write down 3 goals that you have this year and why those goals are important to you. So for the next 5 minutes, that individual will take time and just write out their top 3. It could be health goal, personal goal, it doesn't really matter. And then at the end of those 5 minutes, that person will tell you, hey, Brenden, these are my top 3 goals. I want to make more money. I want to lose weight. I want to improve my relationship with my significant other, etc. And here is why these goals are important to me. After they're done saying that, Roger, we reply with a restate. So restate simply means, hey, just to make sure I got that, Roger, you said your top 3 goals were A, B, and C, and this is why those goals were important to you. Did I get that correctly? Is there anything else you want to add? It doesn't have to be this formal, by the way. I'm just teaching it in a formal way. Could be like, hey, dude, like, did I get that right? Like, it doesn't matter. Like, and then often what happens, you'll say, actually, Brent, I wanted to say these 2-3 things. And then the key part to this call, Roger, is after that part is over, for the remainder of the call, you are not allowed under any circumstances whatsoever to give that person advice. The only thing you're allowed to do is to ask clarifying questions and restate. Clarifying questions and restate. Example, let's say that goals call continues. One example could be, hey, Roger, I know you said one of your goals was to increase your podcast downloads. You want the show to be bigger. Let's say. What are your downloads right now? What would your downloads like to be? What's your vision for the podcast? And these are questions I'll ask you, and then you'll respond, but I'll never give advice. I'll go, oh, is that what, I'll restate, is that what you said? And then I go to the next question. If you do that with 10 people, your listening skills will improve and skyrocket very quickly.
Wow. I love how I really do, Brenden, love how you're giving actionable advice. And I think you started off even this podcast with, so much is based on theory and academia. And you're just, no, here's what you do. Put it into action. This is how you make a change. Some people say that over communicating is the key to success. And one of my favorite quotes is General Douglas MacArthur, where he says, great generals don't give commands that are understood. They give commands that cannot be misunderstood. And I, just like that, just resonated with me, as a leader. And I would love to understand your thought as you're training somebody, because my experience has been a lot of times we have, a conversation going on in our own head that we're trying to communicate to somebody, and we expect, assume, think they know what we're talking about. And when you're an observer and you watch this happen, you're like, oh my gosh, that what you're saying, you're making such leaps and assumptions that this other person knows what you're trying to communicate. So how do you coach the people that are your clients to ensure that maybe over communication is the wrong term, but that their message is actually being heard and received in the way? Because you just shared how to actively listen to make sure that you're receiving the correct. But if we flip that, let's flip that. How do you coach your clients so that to make sure that whatever they're communicating is correctly communicated and they're, we're not making assumptions?
Absolutely. First of all, everybody, including me, needs to write down that general quote, because that was so good. And I'll put a note to myself at the end of this podcast to write that and teach that back to my clients, because that's exceptional. I really like that a lot. I don't think over communicate is the wrong word here, Roger. I definitely think that's directionally correct. But now the question becomes, how do we improve on this based on the context? So what I found in general when I'm coaching execs is this idea of communicating expectations and making sure the team understands the expectations will vary wildly, and the strategy will vary wildly based on the context. Example, so let's say I'm coaching an employee one-on-one to deliver the work that I used to do verbatim of what I'm doing, so that I don't have to do the work anymore. And then there's another version of that, which is, okay, how do we communicate the grander vision and strategy of the quarter and the year to the team and make sure that's etched into people's minds? So let's cover the first one for at the beginning, and then we can cover the second one if you'd like. So the first piece is the idea of, how do we get an individual contributor, like somebody that we work with, and I still have a lot of these one-on-one calls with my staff to make sure that people are aligned. The best way to do it is to start by teaching it, then having them repeat it, and then demonstrating it. Mm-hmm. So the first part is going, okay, let's say I'm working with Julia. So I'm teaching Julia, okay, Julia, this is how I get booked on podcasts. This is the process I want you to follow. And then the second piece is, Julia, can you repeat what you heard? No judgment, totally fine if you missed anything. And what happens is Julia will usually get 70-80% of it right. So what I heard, Brenden, is I need to do this, and then this. I go, yes, and we missed the last part. do that again. So just repeat that again for me. And then Julia will go, this is perfect. Exactly. And then once they've repeated it, then I want you to teach it back to me by demonstrating it. So that person will start doing it and teach it back to me. And then I'll just listen and not do anything. And usually what happens at this point, 90% of the time, Julia got it. Right? She'll go like this, and I'll go, great, I'll clap for her, and then we celebrate, and I move on. That's the way you solve for that problem.
Man, I'm having a real strong appreciation. I'm sure you're doing this intentionally, using frameworks. Like you have everything I've asked you, you have a framework for, which makes it so much more digestible for a client and for a listener. Too many people, I think, give some advice and, it's off the cuff, or it's some, just here's an example. But everything I've heard you say, there's a specific framework around that people can then repeat, learn, repeat, learn, which is, it's outstanding, Brenden, outstanding. I want to have you, if you could, just speak a little bit. I don't know if there's enough said on this, and I would love to get your input on communication styles and approach for in-person versus what you and I are doing right now, which is virtual. And so much more of business is being done virtually, of all communication is being done virtually. How does one, and how do you coach them to approach in-person versus virtually differently, or do you?
Absolutely. And just a side note on what you said before around the appreciation. And that's the result of doing 500 question drills, right? So like if I solved the problem 2 years ago and I didn't know the answer, frankly, like somebody would go, okay, Brenden, how do you teach that? And I go, I don't know. I don't have an employee yet. Like I haven't really done that yet. They go, well, Brenden, you know what? I'm coaching my employee. I do X. And I go, great. Can I use that? And they go, great. And then I try it, and then I'll try it on a client. And then once it works, I bring it to the public. I bring it to the general public. So that's really the idea. It's the result of, hey, if you do the question drill a lot, I'm not the product of I was born with all the expertise. Sure. I'm a product of, hey, wait a second. If Brenden, I'm one of the youngest people in my industry, right, at the level I'm at. But because I've done the question drill 1,000 times, I can play ball with everyone else, even if they're all older than me. And that's the hope I have for this audience. So that's, anyways, side note on that. Tangent over. Going into your question now. So what I've found from experience, Roger, is that the advice is relatively the same when it's in person versus online, but there's 3 main key differences I always like to highlight. So the first one is eye contact, and it's going to be obvious when I mention it. So when you're in person, you're moving your body around to the people that you're engaging with in a crowd. So if you're speaking in front of 50 people, you're moving your eye contact to look and build engagement. Whereas online, it's simple and complicated at the same time, where whether you're speaking to 1 or 10,000 people on a Zoom call, you actually are only supposed to look in one direction, which is the camera lens, right, of your laptop or of your PC. And it gives the illusion that you're looking at everybody at the same time. That's the first key difference. The second key difference is energy. Let's face it, Roger. I have a lot more energy in person than I do virtually, and we all do, because you have more accountability. You actually have to shower that morning. You have to show up on time. You have to give people high fives, and you use that energy to say, okay, I really need to show up today because they're right in front of me and I don't want to mess this up. Whereas virtually, you could show up at 9:30. You don't have to shower. If you don't brush your teeth, no one really knows. So the only solution I have for that is you got to bring more energy in person and transfer as much of that as possible back into the Zoom call. And then the last key difference is audience interaction. So when you're in person and you want feedback from your audience, it's very easy. So let's say you're in front of me and I go, Roger, you're a fantastic communicator. What advice do you have for me? You could easily say, hey, Brenden, let's go grab lunch, because you're right in front of me. It's just like, oh, let's just go. And then you'll give me some pointers. I'll write it down. I'll go, oh, that's really good. But online, you don't get that benefit because the Zoom call just ends. So you need to go through the extra effort of DMing people, messaging people, or even throwing a Calendly link in the Zoom call and say, hey, book some time with me. I want to get your feedback. And then that's the way you do. There's more friction online. That's all.
That makes sense. Yeah. So you've talked about this some, but I want to give you just a platform here to talk about MasterTalk. And you started the interview with it, but I would just love if we could dive a little deeper in, just so that listeners that want to explore your free content can, but also I'd imagine some of them want to engage with you and really get better. Because and I've told everybody, if you can persuade and influence, you can lead, and you can publicly speak, you're about 95% of the way there in business. Like those are the three things you need, but they're all three vitally important. So just if you could talk about how somebody would engage with you, how they can find MasterTalk, how they can, actually even work with you directly.
Absolutely, Roger. This is super fun, by the way. Thanks for having me on the show.
Oh, you bet.
And I think you had a couple more fun questions as well, so I can't wait to dive into that. So the easiest way to keep in touch is actually Instagram. So my handle is Master Your Talk, and your is spelled YOUR. So just send me a DM there and let me know what you thought of the episode, and I'll reply back with a voice note. And then we can invite you to like a free workshop that I do every few weeks, and we can start the conversation there.
Cool. Super cool. This segment is sponsored by Beamlight Sauna Franchising. Are you looking to take control of your destiny and own your own business? Do you want a great brand in a rapidly growing market? Well, Beamlight Sauna is a nationwide health and wellness franchise with amazing opportunities in select markets. You can bring the power of infrared sauna and red light therapy to your community while you build a thriving business. Beamlight Sauna offers support that includes site selection, build out, even pre-launch programs and turnkey marketing, so you can open your studio with a large recurring revenue member base. To learn more about business ownership and franchise opportunities in the fast-growing health and wellness space, go to beamlightsauna.com. That's BEEM lightsauna.com and click on franchise opportunities to learn more. So I always ask three questions, and the first one is, I'm an avid reader. Anybody that listens to this show knows that I tear through books. I just took the Strengths Finder, that Gallup Strengths Finder exercise again. I had taken it 25 years ago, and I think Achiever was my number one. Now Learner is my number one identified strength. And it's funny because in school, I seem to get better and more interested in school the longer I was in it. So like by the time I took my MBA, I was actually wanting to be there, really enjoying it. And since then I've just devoured as much learning material as I could. And so I always love to learn from guests, and I want the listeners to learn from guests around maybe a specific book that you've read. And it could be fiction, nonfiction, self-help, business, biography, whatever, but a specific book that you've read, Brenden, in the last year, in the last 10 years, whatever it was, that when you set it down, you said, whoa, I will never think about this subject the same again. This has a permanent imprint on me. Is there one that you could share with the audience?
Absolutely, Roger. And I'll come from a different frame. I don't read books at all, like very rarely. So if I recommend one, it means like it is worth you investing 8-9 hours of your time to listen. Most of my learning consumption comes from podcasting and coaching, like the people who coach me.
Yeah.
So a lot of fun. So here's my favorite book of all time that I've gifted the most to other people, which is Thirst by Scott Harrison. So Thirst by Scott Harrison, and that's spelled THIRST, tells the story of the founder of Charity Water, who's Scott. He used to be a nightclub promoter in New York City, got people drunk for a living. He's actually one of the best nightclub promoters in the whole city, which is important and really, really cool.
Yeah.
But he hated his life. So what does he do? He goes on to build a nonprofit called Charity Water, which ends up becoming one of the biggest water charities in the world and the biggest charity in America for that specific problem. And the reason I really like Scott is for a couple of reasons. One is I think he's one of the best storytellers in the world. The way that he tells the story of Charity Water, going back to my brand, which is all about practicality, is really fun to see somebody's using public speaking communication as a way to like bring in a ton of dollars. I think Charity Water has raised like $600 million or something since its inception. It's pretty wild. And he brought, and that's number one. The second piece is branding, where he really created a Nike-like brand with a nonprofit budget.
Yeah.
And I think that's really powerful as well. And the third one, I just find the guy inspiring. The water crisis is not a fun problem to solve. It's not exciting. It's not sexy, but it's what needs to get done. And the fact that Scott's incredible talent was used on this problem versus he could have started his own business and done very well for himself is really inspiring too. So I love the audiobook. I love the book, and it's the one that I gift the most and recommend the most.
We'll put that in the show notes along with your IG handle as well in the show notes for the listeners. I have not read that, but based on what you just said and the key phrase that you used means it'll be in my Amazon cart and purchased within 30 minutes of this podcast ending, is you've gifted that book more than any other, which tells me like anybody that actually will spend their own money to give somebody because they want them to benefit from it so much, that's even more powerful than, you should check this book out. So that I like that. That's you put your money where your mouth is. I love that. All right. Last couple questions. And this one is I love this question because it was asked to me and it really made me think. If we were to fast forward to, and you are a young guy, so this is going to be a long time, but let's say we fast forward to the end of your life and you've lived this wonderful, beautiful, rich life. You've helped so many people overcome their fear of speaking and become very powerful communicators. But, like all of us, it comes to an end one day and we're at your funeral and you're looking down from above or from wherever, and a loved one is reading your eulogy. And that loved one is only allowed 3 words, 3 descriptors to describe the way you impacted the world. What 3 words do you hope that loved one chooses to describe the life you lived?
You got me stumped, Roger. Question drill that I did not prepare for in advance. I love it. I've answered similar questions, like Lewis Howes asks like the 3 truths question.
Yeah.
So I've answered that one, but the 3 words question, I'll definitely be spending some time after this podcast thinking about it, but I'll give you what's on my mind now.
Sure, please.
So the first word that comes to mind is intense. I'm a very intense human being, and that's a big part of my brand and why I've been able to ascend in this industry really young. And I think that's what I would love for people to remember more is like, if you want to do big things in life, there's this level of intensity that you just need to have. Because to do great things, you have to be willing to do what 99% of people aren't willing to do, right? And that's why on Podmatch, I'm the number 1 ranked guest. I've been on 500 podcasts, right? Because I'm crazy. Wow. I've been on weed shows. I've been on sports shows. Just because I want to meet the host. I want to learn from the host to make sure that what comes out of my mouth is equally relevant for my $1 million earner clients as it is for the single mom who has 7 kids. Like there's a level of obsession. So intense is the word. Second word is probably impact. I'm really big on this idea of how do we create effective change in a way that's actually useful. So I'm not just throwing around the word impact for the sake of it, like a lot of people do. Like really, like how do you solve a problem that's really specific? And so I've dedicated my lifespan as a human being on this earth to just solving communication and public speaking, but be the best at it. And that's what I've dedicated my life to. And I'm in my 9th year of it, and I'll be spending a lot more time in it. So that's 2. If I had to pick one last word, I would probably say, I want to say something controversial. I don't want to say something generous or anything like that. I'd probably say insane as my 3rd word, even if it's very similar to the first word that I use. Just because I'm a crazy guy. Like I think the most fascinating human beings, or the people that I love speaking to the most, honestly, are the people who relentlessly follow their own uniqueness as human beings. Like they keep searching for the things that only they're excited about. There's this great quote that I'm going to butcher. It's like, there's only one path that you can follow that is meant for you, and you should be walking that path. And I think being insane is part of that. I have this quote called be insane or be the same. And the reason I like that word so much is because you really need a level of insanity in your life to go against your own biology as human beings. And what I mean by that is our goal is to survive. That's what our brain is wired to do. So for you to go against that implies that you're going against your own tendency as a human. And I think that's fascinating. So those are the 3 words now, but I'll come back to you with a better answer.
No, there's only an answer, right? Just there's only the answer. You're right, though. We are programmed for millions of years to survive and avoid risk. And yet in business and to live an amazing life, you have to be a little insane. You have to take some crazy risks. You have to put it out there. And our ancestors for millions of years thought, if I leave the cave, I'm going to be eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. So I need to stay right here and not move and not change. But nothing good ever, you can't prosper. At some point, you got to go out and hunt that tiger. Yeah. All right. So last question. If and you've talked with so many different people, and again, because of your business, you're exposed to many different cultures. And the world today is, to use your word, a little insane. And if you had a magic wand, and I gave you if I gave you a magic wand, and you could wave that magic wand, and Brenden, you could make the world different in one way, just one, but one way, and as big a change as you wanted to make, but you could make the world different in one way. If you wave that magic wand tonight, when we wake up tomorrow, how would the world be different according to Brenden?
That's amazing, Roger. I'll give you the idealistic version and the practical one. So the practical one is I would solve the world's easiest problem. It's one of the frames that I'm working. It's a body of work that I'm working on. Is like this idea of like if all of humanity focused on the world's easiest problem, so we don't debate it, everybody would get aligned. It would be really easy, right? Because we're spending a lot of money, rightfully so, wrongfully so. We could have a debate about this another day, like billions of dollars on cancer research, but it still hasn't been solved. So it's like, okay, let's solve the problem, another problem with the same amount of money. That's the practical answer. The utopian answer is I would make the world fall in love with each other, right? If you get to that place and everyone just loves each other, and I'm not there yet, honestly. I've only met one person who's there, they're like a monk. Is like if we could all get to that place, including me, I think most of the world's problems will get solved.
Yeah. There'd be a whole lot less war. That's for sure.
Yeah.
That's for sure. Yeah. I love it. So again, just one more time, how can people get in touch with you and follow you? And again, we'll put it in the show notes, but just remind the listeners one more time.
Yeah, for sure, Roger. The easiest way is Instagram. So my handle is Master Your Talk. Your is spelled YOUR. Just send me a DM and let me know you listen to this podcast, and I'll reply with a voice note. Thank you for listening.
Awesome. Well, Brenden, I want to genuinely thank you. I am very grateful for you coming on here, and I've just found you to be an incredibly authentic dude that just is just candid, and truly, I can tell like you are working incredibly hard to master your craft to benefit other people. Like not just master it, but to master it to benefit other people, and that's commendable, man. Well done.
Thanks, Roger. I really appreciate your kind words. There's not a lot of people who can see the effort and like the sheer grit that I'm putting into this, so it really doesn't go unnoticed, and I really appreciate your kind words.
Yeah, well, my pleasure. Thank you for tuning in to the ThriveMore podcast. Don't forget to take a look at the show notes for any of the resources that we mentioned during the podcast, and if you haven't already, be sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on your notifications so you have access to the latest and the greatest. You can connect with me on any of the socials at Real Roger Martin. And be sure to check out our website, ThriveMoreBrands.com. There you'll find information on the brands we support and information on franchising. Thanks again for tuning in.